Okay. Hello everyone. Welcome back to Python programming for economics. So in previous session we learned about variable, data types, Python operator. We also used Python to calculate indicators such as GDP per capita, trade balance, growth rate and unemployment rate. So until now most of the values were directly written inside the program. But today we are going to make our program more interactive. So instead of fixing the country name or economic value inside the code, we will ask user to enter them. Also, we'll learn how Python works with the text data. So in programming, text is known as what? String. So this is going to be a very practical session because string are everywhere in the economic data. Okay, like country names are string, state names are string, then economic sector names are also string. So indicator labels such as GDP growth, CPI, that is consumer price index, unemployment rate are all things string. So by end of the this particular notebook, okay, we will create an interactive economic profile that accepts the information from user, cleans the information, performs the calculation and displays properly reported format. Okay, so this is the notebook. Also remember that all numerical values we entered or enter will be entering or demonstrated during the lesson will be completely illustrative, and we are learning programming, so this value should not automatically treated as official or current statistics sources. Okay, now I hope you guys have understood how to use notebook, but still to give a short intro for it. See, before we start coding, let's quickly understand like how this notebook works. First, read all the explanation before running the code. Second, type the most important example by yourself. Watch code that is useful, but typing code is where actually learning happens. Third, execute or run every code cell. Fourth, change the input value. For example, instead of entering India, try entering Brazil, Japan, Kenya or any other country. Fifth, predict the output before running the code. And lastly, ask yourself, what do I think will Python display for me? Okay, so even when prediction is wrong, that is still useful because you are learning how Python behaves. Okay, similarly, complete exercise before checking the solution notebook is recommended, and most importantly, interpret the results economically. Also, Python can calculate values, but Python does not automatically understand whether the value is meaningful, realistic or based on the correct inputs. Okay, the part is our job as an economist and as a researcher. Okay, so if we talk about the learning outcome, see, after completing this notebook you should be able to understand the difference between input and output, how the input function works, why the input function always written as a string, how to convert the user input, how to work with text data, how to use indexing and slicing, how to apply string methods, how to clean the economic labeled data, and how to build an economic interactive dashboard. So do not worry if some of these terms sound new right now, we will handle them one by one. Okay, so let's start with the first section, that is input and output. See, input means information that is supplied to a program, and output is what? Information that is displayed by the program. So for example, let's say imagine that we are creating a small economic calculator. So user enter what? The country name, the year, total GDP, population or inflation rate. Okay, so these are inputs. The program may then display GDP per capita, a formulated economic statement or an economic profile as well. So these are output. So in Python we usually write the input function, okay, which you will see the input is written and parenthesis, and to collect information, and to print we will say print function to display the information. Okay, now just let's try to execute our first code. Okay, so here if you see, it says what? We have took a variable in which we are passing a input function, and in this input function we are passing a banner, enter the country name. Okay, and what we are doing is we are coming on next line and we are just writing print function, and inside this print function we are calling what? The variable. Now what will happen? Now once we execute the cell, you might be seeing that the cell is executed and is asking like enter the country name. So like I will enter India now, okay, and press enter. So you'll see Python stores a value and then displays it. So let us understand the first line carefully. See, the word country is what? It's a variable name. The equal to sign is what? It's a assignment operator. Okay, and the input function pauses the program and waits for what? For the user's input. Okay, the sentence inside the quotation mark is called as what? It's known as prompt. Okay, so prompt tells the user what information to enter, and the value entered by the user is then stored in the variable known as country. Second line, you know that it's a print function, so this displays the value that is stored in the variable. So the basic sentence is like, first ask for the information, second store the information, third display or use the information. Okay, so with this like let's talk about the interactive country name that we can type. So here you can just enter different country name by re-executing the code again and again. Okay, you can write Brazil, enter, and you will see that the output is getting processed. So this time let's process with the next code now. See, now what we are doing, this is known as an interactive country and a indicator selection. So just look at this code and I will first execute the code completely. You will see that it asks for enter a country name. I will enter as India. Okay, secondly, for the indicator it says enter the economic indicator. I will mention GDP growth. Okay, so here this program is interactive because the output changes according to what user is going to enter. Okay, now if I run the cell again and enter any other country name and like another any other economic indicator, the statement changes automatically and it prints the output. The same logic can be later used in economic dashboard, survey application, data entry tool, indicator calculators, policy analysis, and many other stuff. Okay, so I hope this is clear to you. Let's move to the next point, that is input function that always return as string. See, this is one of the most important thing to remember. The input function will always return a string. Okay, so even when you type any digit, okay, or let's say digit, or we can say it is a number, so Python initially stores the input and text, okay, and then processes it. So let us test it. So at first I will just execute the statement for you. Okay, and what I will do is just wait for the output. So sometime depending upon your internet connection, it takes a little time, it processes it. So here what is happening, at first we have a variable, okay, known as year, and we have called input function in which we are going to enter a prompt, enter the year. Okay, then what is going to happen, we are processing the next variable, that is GDP, and we are calling again input function with the prompt, enter total GDP. And then what we are doing, we are calling the printing function where it is going to print the year, and if you see we have called comma type the year variable. Okay, so now I don't know, see, let me stop the initial execution of code, then it can process well for the next code. Yeah, so if you see, if I enter here as 2026, you will find that, and second is enter GDP, so let me enter something around 3500. Okay, so you will see it is mentioning 2026 as a class string and 35,000 as a class string also. Okay, so the letter string str means what, it's a string. So even though 2026 looks like a whole number, Python has stored it as a text form. So even though 3500 is a number, it okay, but still it is storing everything as a text. So this is not a mistake, this is how simply the input function works. Okay, now why this matters for us, see, let's look at the next point. See, just look at, let me execute the code for you first. So if you see, we have a population variable in which I have mentioned input function to enter the population, then I'm printing the population, and then I'm going to print the population type. So I will enter population as 1 lakh crore something. Then if you see, the Python simply stores it is a str. So now suppose we try to divide the value. Okay, but if we try to divide this value, so the notebook contains here this commented result. Let me just uncomment this particular area. Okay, so and let me just execute this. So you will see that if I'm entering a huge number, okay, and processing it, it is going to give me something known as a type error. Why? Because Python cannot directly divide text by a number. The value may look completely numerical to us, but Python sees it as a text form. So before using an input in arithmetic, we must convert it into what? Into a numeric form. Okay, let's look at the next point now. See, this one has a numeric string and concatenation. Okay, here what we are doing is we have a value a in which we have stored a string 10. Then we have a variable, second variable, which in which we are storing value b is equal to string 5, and we are just printing this whole variable a and variable b. So let me just execute this. So before executing this, can you just predict what can be the answer? Okay, just try to predict the answer, and trust me, it will be completely wrong. So let me just execute this. You will see that the value that I am getting over here is what? It's 105. Now why we are getting 105 even though this is a string? See, the plus operator has performed what? Joining. Okay, so this is known as what? Concatenation. Concatenation means what? Python joins 10 and 5 to create what? 105. Now let's convert both the values into string values. Okay, so here if you see, we have what? We have a first variable, that is value a is equal to int 10. Okay, now what we are doing is we are going to convert this 10 as a string into a integer. Then we have a second variable, that is value underscore b, and here we are going to convert the string 5 into integer. Okay, and what we are going to do is we are going to execute this, and you will see we are getting the result as what? As a 15. So this time Python perform numerical addition because both values are integer. Okay, so the difference between the text and a number is very important when working with the imported economic data. So the column may look numerical but may actually be stored as what? Text data. Okay, then let's look at the next point now. Converting user input. See, Python provides multiple conversion functions. So the main function used over here are integer function, float function, and string. So integer is used to convert text into whole number, then for the float function convert the text into decimal number, and string to convert the value into text. So let us see them with the user input now. Okay, so over here just look at the code. Here you will see we have a year variable in which we have passed integer, then we have passed input, and we are asking enter the year. Okay, at second instance, if you say I am taking a second variable, population is equal to integer function, that I am passing input function and passing a prompt, enter the population. Next is GDP variable in which I am passing the float function, then the input function, and I am passing prompt, enter total GDP. And the lastly inflation rate function variable in which I am passing float function, input function, and I am passing enter inflation rate. So over here let me just execute the code for you. Okay, now in enter here I will be entering 2026. Okay, then in population let's say 14,000, then in GDP let's say 35. Okay, and for inflation let's say 4.8. Okay, now examine the output. Okay, so here you will see that the year, once I mentioned 2026, is now having what? The type as integer. The GDP and inflation have type as float. Okay, then this performs what? The information is now ready for what? Some kind of numerical calculation. See, understanding the evaluation order is one more important aspect in this. See, for here if you see, you have written year. Okay, in this year I have mentioned as is equal to assigning integer function. In this we have passed the input function and we have entered the year. Okay, so Python works from what? Inside out. Means what? First if you are passing the input, it's going to collect the value as text, and suppose we are going to enter a 206. Okay, 2026, then it's going to convert the 2026 string into what? Into the integer form. Okay, and finally that particular year or the particular number would be stored inside what? The variable year. Okay, so the sequence is input first, okay, conversion second, and then assignment. The same logic applies over here also. So if you see, this particular section, so it will say that here is 2026. Okay, so what we are doing is, this is an integer. Okay, and what we are doing is, we are just trying to convert the number to text now. So the variable is here initially as an integer, then the string function converts it into the text form, and the displayed value still looks like what, 2026. So but the type now, if you check it, it is mentioning as what, class as str. Okay, so this is useful when we need a text label or when we want to combine value with another string. So most of the time, however, f string makes this process quite easier also. Okay, so this is all. So let's move to the next section, that is interactive GDP per capita. See, now we will try to combine the input, conversion, string cleaning, calculation, and format the output in a one single go. So what is the formula for this? GDP per capita equals to GDP divided by total population. Okay, so now let me just execute the code and then explain you the complete code. So in this code, it says the input function, so I will enter India over here. Then it says the total GDP. So in total GDP, I will mention somewhere around like 500. Then enter population, like let's say 15, and it is mentioning what the GDP per capita is of India is somewhere around 33.33. Okay, now let's try to understand this code in detail. See, if you look, we have a variable country in which we have passed the input function. Okay, and everything would be stored inside what, inside the string data type. Now there is something known as a dot strip function. Okay, so now this dot strip method actually removes the unnecessary spaces at beginning and at the end of the string. Then there's something known as a dot title function, which capitalizes the first letter of each word. Okay, let's say the user enters India as something, let's say India in small case. Okay, then 515. So you will see it is mentioning that GDP per capita is capital I India is equal to 33.33. Means what, you have converted this India, okay, into what, with I capital. Okay, so next line collects what, GDP. So here if you see, it is mentioned as what, float. We are going to pass the input, then the prompt, enter total GDP, and in population if you see, it's like an integer, again input, and it is mentioning as prompt, enter the population. And if you see, the equation says GDP per capita is equal to GDP divided by population. Okay, and also what we are doing is we are storing the result with two floating point decimal values. Okay, so this is how it works. So if you try to interpret this in economic terms, see, GDP per capita is a total economic output divided by population, and is commonly used to compare the average economic output per person. But please do not say GDP per capita is actually income received by every person. Okay, so it is not, GDP per capita does not directly tell us like how income is getting distributed, how many people are poor, whether some region are richer than the other or not, and whether the public services are available, or like whether the quality of life if is improving or not. So we must mention that GDP unit as well. Okay, so GDP was entered in rupee, dollar, million, billion, trillion. The interpretation also changes a lot. So programming calculation may be correct, but economic interpretation may depend on the valid units and definition. Okay, so with this, let's move to the next point, that is division by zero. See, now just let me execute the code for you. Okay, so it mentions what GDP is having, there is a variable GDP which having value as 1000, population as 0. Okay, so let me just uncomment this specific line and execute the code again. So you will see GDP is 1000 divided by 0. Ultimately it says what, 0 division error. Okay, right? So why? Because division by 0 is completely undefined in normal calculators also. So Python is producing what, 0 division error. Now notebook therefore prints what, instead of, we know that this kind of error will occur, so I am doing what, I am just processing instead of that population must be greater than 0. Okay, now see, always check the denominator before performing any kind of division. Why? Because this applies not only to population but also to calculation involving the labor forces, working age population, previous values, sample size, and total output as well. Okay. So and soon we are going to discuss out like different types of error and how to handle those different kinds of error in a proper sense. So let's move to the next point, introduction to string. See, a string represents a text. Strings are written inside quotation mark. So let me just execute this particular statement for you, and you will see the output like country India, it prints India, state Maharashtra, services, then indicator is equal to GDP, and currency equals to Indian rupee. Now each variable, what is happening, it is storing the text. So country name, state name, sector label, indicator names are naturally depending what as a string. Okay, then there is known as something known as a single quote and double quotation for creating a string. See, both single and double quotation marks can create string. How? For example, let me just execute the first variable. Okay, and so you'll see it prints the variable A, variable first country A is equal to India with double quote, it is printing. Similarly, if I just execute the second line, it says what, second variable country B is equal to Brazil with single quote. Okay, now what is happening, it is still printing the Brazil. Okay, now let's look at the third variable, that is report title is equal to the economic outlook. Okay, report. So we'll use a single quotation mark outside this because the text content double quotation mark, right? So let's try to see what will be the output for this. You'll see that it only took the first single quote instead of the double quote that is there inside the economic outlook. Okay, so it uses double quotation mark because the text contains an apostrophe. Okay, so the main rule is consistent, use whenever whichever option makes text easier to read and write. Okay, similarly I will just execute the last one also, and you will see India's GDP series. Now let's look at the second scenario, that are string are case sensitive. Means what? See, let me just execute these both scenarios for you. Now here what is happening, we have a first variable country 1, okay, which mentioned as what, India with double quotes. Then we have a second variable India with I small double quotes. Okay, and what I am doing is I am trying to compare the variable 1 with variable 2. Now this equal to means what, we are going to check the LHS equal to RHS, and after execution you might see that it mentions that it is false value is getting processed. Now what is the meaning of this false value? It means that these two values, these two output are not at all identical to each other. Okay, so this matters when matching the country name with the categorical values. See, in real data set, inconsistent capitalization can create duplicate looking categories also. So for example, India with I capital, India with all letters in a uppercase, India with letter smaller case, and India with, let's say, D in uppercase. So as a human sees same country, but Python may treat them completely as a different value. Okay, so with this let's move to the next point, that is string length with the length function. See, here if you see, the length function is being used to perform the counting of characters. Okay, so here if you see, we have a variable which is mentioned as India with I capital. Okay, then there is another variable which mentioned as indicator equals to GDP growth, and here, if as you know, India is like a 5-letter word, and GDP space growth contains what, 10 characters, because the space is also getting counted. So spaces and punctuations are also part of string. So this function can be useful for validating the code, checking the ID length, examining the text field, and identifying the what we can say, the unusual entries that can be available. Okay, so for today that's all for now. Thank you everyone.